Hi guys, I wanted to talk to you today about the cost of living crisis and a fundamental point that I think has been missed in all of the media coverage that I've seen. Um, and also, I wanted to talk a little bit about the origins of the cost of living crisis. We have a media in this country and pretty much everywhere across the West that likes to shorten the narrative on any particular issue. So the cost of living crisis is being presented as a right now thing, something that's just happened as a result of Ukraine and as a result of the after effects of COVID and possibly Brexit. The reality is that the cost of living crisis is in effect 40 years in the making, 45 years in the making. We see the seeds of the cost of living crisis being sowed with the Thatcher government. I'll talk a little bit about the Thatcher government in a second. The most important thing I think here to remember is that government policy takes a generation to be felt. It takes 25, 30 years for the society to really see the impacts of a government policy. Now, politicians really understand this, but they trade on this short-termism. Why? Because they're essentially temps. They're in the job for 4 years, 8 years, and then they're going to be gone. So it makes sense for them to implement long-term changes and then be out the door when those changes are felt, and then everybody can argue the toss and say, well, it wasn't this, it was that, or it's been caused by something else. So let's look at the Thatcher government, and let's also look at the causes of inflation in the 70s, as that's being referenced quite a lot in the media, and the causes of inflation now. Now, it is true to say that in the late 60s, early 70s, the trade union movement was very, very powerful in this country. And it was seen by a lot of people on the right as being too powerful as they pushed for more and more rights. So a lot of the rights that we laud today about in the UK for workers' rights, equality and anti-discrimination rights, things like that. All of those things came out of the trade union movement, and they all had to be fought for. They weren't given willingly by the right wingers and the establishment. Now, the Tory party and a lot of people on the right felt that the trade unions were too strong. So when Thatcher came into power in '79, um, one of her missions was to smash the trade unions, to break them up, which she effectively did. And we're living with just the remnants of that trade union today. But what she also did, and what the Tory government has started a trend of, which has continued all the way through the Blair Brown years into the new iteration of the Tories, was moving public assets into private hands. So the selling off of the railways, the breaking up of industry, the selling off of the utility companies, telecoms, everything that the state owned, moving those into private hands. And crucially, one of the ones that's really fueled inflation was the right to buy. Now, the right to buy was a genius move from Thatcher's point of view because it did three things. One, it moved public money into private hands. Two, it bribed a generation and a half of people into voting Tory. And three, it broke up the working class community. So while the Thatcher was attacking the unions, or also selling off the council housing meant that people have started to move around. Our communities have become much more transient, and as a result, our collective experience as a community has basically disappeared. Our identities as a community now are much more up for grabs, and I believe that that's one of the reasons why we've become so obsessed with labels 40 years on, because we don't really know who we are anymore. So what has this got to do with the cost of living crisis today? Well, essentially, and it's really an incredible myth that the Tories have managed to perpetrate, that they are good with the economy. Because essentially, if you think about the economy of the country like an economy of a household, essentially when you're selling off your state-owned infrastructure, what you're saying is, well, instead of having an oven and a microwave, we'll sell those for cash right now and we'll just get takeaways. Instead of having a washing machine, we'll sell that and we'll just use the dry cleaner. Instead of hoovering up and buying polish and stuff, we'll sell all that stuff off and we'll just pay a cleaner to come in. That's obviously going to be more expensive. Yeah, you've got money in the short term, but it's obviously going to be more expensive in the long term. And what you're going to get for even the more money that you're spending out is a less service. Now, what that means for working people is that the infrastructure that they could rely on is diminishing all the time. Also, with the housing market has had a false injection because people were given massive discounts when they were given the right to buy. That's a false injection of cash into the housing market, which has kicked off continual inflation, which then has attracted, like vultures, investors, foreign investors, which have further pushed up the house prices, and now it's got out of control. It's a monster that the government has created that they cannot slay because there's so many of their own voters who have made so much money out of it. So although they can see that it's obviously headed for a crash, they won't get to grips with it. No government since '79 has really tried to get to grips with the housing market. The other thing that is driving inflation is the rise of consumer debt. Now, this goes hand in hand with wage stagnation. Wages have been stagnating in this country for a number of reasons. One, because of the explosion in the import of cheap goods, which are reliant on exploitative labour from weaker economies like China, or Indonesia, or Bangladesh. And two, it's not popular with Remainers, but the reality is that the freedom of movement under the membership of the EU, and particularly when the AA Ascension states joined, which were essentially second world nations which did not meet the criteria of the economic criteria of the EU, that influx of cheap labour added to the stagnation of wages. And that was a massive problem for the Remain campaign, because the Remain campaign tried to just ignore that point, which it's obvious that is the situation, and there needs to be some type of corrective for that if you wanted to remain part of the European Union. And the fact that they didn't engage with it at all, in my opinion, it was one of their biggest losses, and possibly one of the reasons for the Brexit vote. Now, all of these things, the injection of consumer credit is a huge one, because financial services is now our number one industry, because again the Tories sold off all of our manufacturing industry. That means that wages are stagnating, but debt means that prices can keep going up, right? So the fact that we've got lots of public money disappearing out of the country because foreign-owned companies, I mean, the Tories talk about taking back control and things like that. We have less control over our country than we've ever had, thanks to the Tories. Our railways are run by the German National Rail, by the Dutch National Rail, by the French National Rail. The actual physical stock is owned by rolling stock companies, which are owned in turn by hedge funds, by people in Deutsche Bank and Bundesbank, who in themselves are the same people who effectively run the EU. We've got local government function that is being contracted out now for over a decade to American companies such as Capita. We've even got offshore processing in some places in India, places like that for local government work. There are all sorts of firms from all over the world that have taken up our infrastructure. So we have very, very little control over prices, because we've given it all over to the market. In the meantime, there's been a rise, as I say, in consumer debt, which has pushed up prices. So although it is true to say that, yeah, Corona and the Ukraine war have happened, effectively, what we've been living sort of hand to mouth. We go back to the analogy of a home. We've been living hand to mouth, and then whenever, within debt advice, whenever someone's living hand to mouth, crises come along, emergencies come along, the car breaks down, the fridge stops working, you have an unexpected bill. That's what tips people over into a massive debt spiral, and that is effectively what's happened to us. We've been going along hand to mouth, using consumer debt to drive inflation. It's now become our number one industry, financial services. So there's more of it available than ever before. This cheap credit. We've the average UK unsecured debt is £5,000, over £5,000 per household. And we should be really worried about this. The financial crash of '08 started in the States because of microloans, people not being able to pay back their microloans. So that very bottom of the industry, that small sort of payday loan area, and that is, we could very much see that happening here. The problem we would have with the UK is that's our number one industry. We don't have oil or any kind of manufacturing like the US could rely on to drag itself out. We don't have anything else. We have financial services and weapons, and arms. They're our two biggest industries now, thanks to the last 40 years of what I would say is this neoliberal ideology that the Tories, and we're seeing that Labour, particularly under Brown and Blair, but it looks very much like under Starmer as well, they all adhere to. I think that the COVID period was interesting because that was the one time that you could see governments making decisions that have to happen in real time. And we saw that's just how inept they really are. So anyway, it's been a bit of a kind of whistle-stop tour of the last 40 years. I know I've jumped all over the place, but I'll do another video specifically on the Tory leadership candidates, and specifically on Starmer, and probably look at the impending strikes as well. But let me know what you think. Leave some comments, and I will try and respond to as many of them as I can. All right, guys, take it easy.